Hey there, everybody. Listen, can you believe it's been 2 years since we did that episode on how to make your own apple cider vinegar? And it was so popular of a topic that we get over 50,000 views on that every single month, which happens to translate into quite a few questions from you that I simply wish but cannot answer one at a time. So I wanted to take this episode today and just answer some of the most common questions you write in over and over that I hear again, that I want to make sure you know. One of the most common ones that I hear is, may I use a smidgen of apple cider vinegar that I already have in my kitchen to jumpstart the batch that I'm making from scratch? And the answer is absolutely yes. That's a fantastic idea. Please do. But it's not required. It's just going to help jumpstart it and make it a little bit quicker. Another common question that I hear so often is, my apple cider vinegar is so beautiful those first few weeks with the apples floating in there. Can I put it in the windowsill so that I can see it and enjoy it? And I'm sorry, the answer is absolutely not. It needs to be in complete darkness or at least good shade out of direct sunlight. And those are just a couple of the questions that are so often asked. But it's a little bit chilly out here, my lips are cold, and let's go inside where it's a little warmer and we'll talk through some of those most common, often asked questions. Let me just say before we get started that these questions are in no particular order, or even the ones that are most asked, because all of these are coming in every single month. So here we go. One of the most common questions I'm asked is, how do I store the vinegar? If you noticed in the episode, I mentioned that I put it in the refrigerator, and that kind of threw a few of you off. Let me say this, you're going to want to ultimately, once it's made into vinegar, you're going to want to store it in something like this bottle. I love it because it has a very tight sealing cap that pops down on it. However, while it's being made into vinegar, you definitely don't want it in a tightly sealed container. You want it with a very breathable top on it. So either a coffee filter with a tie around it, that's a perfect thing, or even a very loose fitting lid that's just laid on top that lets the air escape. That will probably work fine as well. Or some cheesecloth, you could do that. But once you've got vinegar made, you're going to store it in a very well sealed container, and a lot of people like to put it in a dark container because that's going to help it as well. So whatever works for you, but you will seal it up, and you're going to put it in the pantry. It can store indefinitely in the pantry. It does not need to be refrigerated. The only reason you heard me mention that was because once I get it to just the right tartness and strength, I like to put it in the refrigerator just because I'm going to drink it, and I like it very, very cold when I drink it, as well as I like the fermentation of it to slow way, way down because I don't want it any tartar than where it has reached. I hope that makes sense. That's the only reason I mentioned that, but I do keep plenty of it on the shelf in a dark cabinet, and that works just fine. Another question is, how do you store the mother? That is a fantastic question, and let me show you this jar that I keep the mother in. I know it looks terribly awful to you, but what you want is that wonderful coagulated thick mass that eventually grows thicker and thicker, that is the mother. You're going to want that submerged completely in vinegar and stored in a tight lidded container. And this can be stored in the pantry or in the refrigerator, either one. I like to store it in the refrigerator. Incidentally, it can handle pretty high heat, and it can even handle being frozen. However, there are a few different strains of bacteria in it that might be killed off by it freezing. I don't recommend freezing it. I just have heard that there are people that do, and they bring it back to life and use it again and again. So do what works for you. I like to keep mine fully submerged in vinegar, tight fitting lid, and stored in the refrigerator. Okay, here's another question. Is the Skoby in kombucha the same thing as mother in vinegar? The answer is no. And you do not want to try to use that Skoby that you have carefully put in that kombucha, or found or made or grown in that. It will not make the right kind of vinegar that you want, that tastes good and is the right kind of bacteria that turns into acetic acid, which is what we need to have good vinegar as the finished product. Nextly, I hear so many people ask about apple seeds and say, what? You just cut up those apples and put in the core and the stem and the seeds? What are you thinking? And I'll just tell you this, do your own research, but if you notice, even on the FDA's website, I believe that that's where you'll find that they say you would have to eat, literally, chew up and swallow 22 apples worth of seeds to probably get enough cyanide to kill you. Because yes, they do have a smidgen of that amygdalin or whatever it is that turns into hydrogen cyanide, but you have to have a huge amount of it. And as you notice, I cut these up, but then once they have made the vinegar after a few weeks and gotten it started, I strain all of them out. So you can't talk me out of putting all of the apple core and seeds in there. Now this will answer another question that is often asked. What about using non-organic apples? Let me say this, one of the questions that is often asked is how do you tell the difference? Well, you want to look on the label first if you buy organic or non-organic apples in the store. But I've understood through my research that these are one of those fruits that are highly sprayed a lot with all kinds of things to keep the bugs away and to keep them nice that you see in the store. So if you happen to get non-organic apples, or even if you do and you just want to be safe, you can go ahead and take the core out, and if you want to be extra careful, you could go ahead and skin those apples. Also, many of you have asked, can I use crab apples? And absolutely, the answer is yes. Crab apples, wild apples, any version you've got. In fact, I've got 3 versions here today. You'll see I've got the wonderful red delicious apples that are so common that we probably grew up eating. Those are just beautiful and I love them this time of year. I also have Honeycrisp apples, which are some of my favorite for just snacking on because they're super crisp and they're right in that medium range of sweetness and tartness. And then the third kind I have here that I most often make vinegar with is the Granny Smith, and they have that really tart taste to them and are very crisp, but they make an excellent vinegar. Whatever you find, use it. You will need to know that for the future. Any kind of apple will work. Another question, why do you put so much sugar in, and won't that be something I have to concern with if I'm a diabetic? My answer to you is, thankfully, the process of it becoming apple cider vinegar is that initially in those first 2 weeks where the apples are submerged, it's going to have a process where the bacteria kind of grows at a steady and strong pace, eating up the sugars. Now, at the end of that 2 weeks, it is not fully made into vinegar. In fact, it's going to make something that many people call hooch or something like that. It's got a lot of alcohol content in it, so don't drink it right at the end of that 2 weeks. You're going to want to wait all the way through another additional somewhere between 4 to 6 to 8 weeks before all of those sugars are eaten up and converted into what we know as that content of acetic acid that makes vinegar special. So remember that. Don't drink it way too early or you'll think, oh, this is just a sweet apple drink, and you might be getting some alcohol content in there. You want to wait till it's all the way finished. But it is fully approved for diabetic use because it eats up all those sugars. And that leads me into the next question that so many people ask. May I use other kinds of sugars? Some of you have asked about maple syrup or honey or brown sugar. Let me say, I think brown sugar is a great idea. It does have just a little bit of molasses in it. That's what brown sugar is just white sugar with some molasses in it. Sure, you could use that. It's going to have a slightly different flavor to the end product, but yes. And you could use the others. However, honey is such an antibacterial, especially the raw honey that is so good for us. It's kind of trying to fight against the very bacteria that you're trying to grow in your vinegar. So it's not recommended you could try it, and some people have had success, but it's going to take you far longer. And I do think there will be strains of bacteria that are completely missing. So you may want to choose just regular old sugar to put in yours to get the right product at the end of it. I hope that answers your question regarding sugars that can be used. A question so many of you ask is sugar needed at all? And my answer to that is actually no. You don't have to put sugar in it. The thing is it's going to take quite a bit longer. And we're already looking at a process that can take anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 to 10 weeks. And if you don't use sugar, you're going to find that it just needs more patience. Now, some of you have asked, may I just put stevia in it in place of sugar because you're diabetic? And I would say absolutely not. That's not going to make sense because stevia is not a replacement for sugar in what it needs to eat in its process of becoming acetic acid in that vinegar. I hope that makes sense. Now, the only time you will see me use stevia is this, and that is how I enjoy taking it each evening for myself. Now, if you're wondering how much to take for yourself, please see a naturopath or your own doctor because they're going to have the best information for you. But for me personally, I do like to take it internally each day. In fact, each evening, after supper, after about an hour, but before I've gone to bed, about an hour before bed, I'll get out one of my favorite little dessert cups and I'll fill it with 2 tablespoons of my homemade apple cider vinegar. Then I fill it the rest of the way with hot water, not boiling, but hot. I'll put in a few drops of my own homemade stevia extract or store-bought if I'm using that at the time, and then some definitely added Saigon cinnamon, which makes it taste absolutely delicious, almost like a little hot apple spider that's spiced or something, and that's a wonderful treat in the evening. There are 3 ways I like to test the strength of my vinegar to know that it's fully ready to be used. These are the ways I do it. First, simple as anything. It's just the smell test. You know when you've got a strong smell that almost makes you shudder when you take a big whiff of it. If I get that strong vinegar smell, I know, boy, it's got to be pretty close. But if I'm still a little uncertain, I try another test, and that is taking about a tablespoon or so of good baking soda, put it down in a dish, and then pour a teaspoon or tablespoon of my vinegar into that same baking soda and just make sure it fizzes up really nice. I know if it gives me a good, nice, strong fizz and bubble, then I've probably got a strong enough product. Then the last way that you can check it is through pH strips. Now, to get the kind that you would test wine with, which is often what people use for vinegar, the test kit is pretty expensive. In fact, it can be as much as $100. So I don't use that. I use the cheap version that I can get at the cheap store, and that is just the pool pH strips that test the pH balance of your pool. It tests several of the different alkalinity strengths and such of the water, but I'm mostly interested in the line that tests the pH balance. Now, I will say this. You're wanting a vinegar that is 4% or less. The lower the pH balance, the higher the acetic content. I hope you get that. So you want a low pH so that you know that it's highly acidic. All right, remember that. So as I dip the stick in and let it set for just a few seconds, enough to get saturated fully with vinegar, and pull it out, I'm going to test it against the side of my little test strip kit here, and it's going to tell me that it at least is far lower than the lowest that it can measure, which is somewhere around that 6.2 or 6.5 level. As long as it's distinctly less in color than that, I know, hey, I've got to be somewhere close to that 5% or even down to 4%, which is what I'm looking for to make this a strong enough vinegar that I could even use in making pickles or something like that. All right? So that's a good kind of poor man's version of how to test it if you really would like to know. You do want to make sure that when you're making your vinegar, it's in a glass container. When you're storing your vinegar, store it in glass. Now, there are certain kinds of plastics that you can store it in because, as you know, you can buy vinegar in a plastic container, but there are so many different kinds that react with vinegar that it's safest for me to just say only use glass or ceramic that has a nice coating on it. Also, you don't want it to be in metal because metal can also react with that acetic acid. So just stick with glass and you should be safe. Well, did we get all your questions answered? I hope we did, at least the ones that are keeping you from starting your own batch of homemade apple cider vinegar. Listen, I'm going to put a couple of links down below this video that are going to help you just in case you have questions that we didn't get answered. Follow the links that I put below this video and that's going to help you a lot. And you know what time it is. You know I'm going to ask you to share this video with someone you love. But lastly, will you do this for me? Will you go out? This time of year, it's so important. Will you go out and find someone who looks lonely or just weary and intentionally make it a point to be a blessing to someone today? I hope you will. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Hey there, before you go, there's this interesting and kind of mysterious verse in Proverbs chapter 22. I'd love to share it with you, and it's verse 11. It says this: "He who loves purity of heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king as his friend." Now go spread the word.